The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. My name is Panjwani from the UK India Business Council, and I will be chairing this session today. Thank you very much for joining us for what promises to be a very enlightening and informative session on the future of work in India, focusing on the importance of vocational and technical skills. We have a brilliant panel of speakers today. We have Cindy Rampersaud from Pearson PLC, Jonathan Ledger from the Department for International Trade, and Anu Gupta from the Department for International Development. They will be sharing their expert insights on the impact of COVID-19 on the Indian skills development sector and what the future of work will look like. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd just like to do a brief scene setter to kick us off. As many of you may be aware, prior to the pandemic, India was already suffering from its highest unemployment rate in 45 years, 8.5% to be exact, as calculated by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. This is partly due to the economic slowdown and partly due to the acute skills shortages prevailing in every sector. The subsequent onslaught of the coronavirus and the nationwide lockdown further exacerbated matters, leaving millions without a job and exposing the deep cracks in India's already fragile skills ecosystem. However, at the same time, and on a more positive note, other sectors have begun moving into the spotlight. Sectors like digital innovation, healthcare, disaster management, data security, e-commerce, and e-learning, to name a few, and with it, a growing demand for cutting-edge new skills related to these sectors. In addition, this pandemic also presents Indian policymakers and leaders with a unique opportunity, which is in carving out a new normal for a post-COVID world, to do it in such a way as to really focus on equipping the country's population with the right current and future skills in education across all income levels, and direct their efforts and reforms to accelerate job creation and encourage entrepreneurship. And this means that India needs to urgently ramp up its vocational and technical skills delivery to make it relevant, future-proof, and inclusive. At the moment, the system is failing for several reasons. These being, one, a glaring disconnect between industry and academia, two, lack of employer engagement in the National Skills Development Mission, three, inadequate integration between mainstream education and vocational training, four, widespread negative perceptions around vocational skills, and finally, neglect of the country's informal sector, which comprises almost 90% of India's workforce, who, despite being very talented, miss out on the training opportunities that would allow them to improve their earnings and livelihoods. That's 90%. I'll just leave that to sink in for a minute. Only by empowering and educating its people from the bottom up and equipping them with the right skills can India build a sustainable economic future for itself and emerge stronger, better, and more resilient in the years to come. UK government agencies like DFID and DIT and companies like Pearson are already working together and in collaboration with local Indian partners and Indian government bodies to share best practices and provide bespoke solutions to bridge the skills gap. During the course of this webinar, our speakers will highlight the various steps that their organizations are taking to remedy these issues. So that's my scene setter done. And now for a bit of housekeeping, if I may. You will all automatically be placed on mute for the session. However, you will notice that there is a question box which you can use at any time to feed in questions or suggestions to me, which I'll put to our excellent guests during the open discussion. If you can also provide your name and company, that would be really helpful. Any questions that we cannot take, we will pass over to speakers after the session. So not to worry if we are not able to answer them due to lack of time. You'll also be glad to know we're recording this session and it'll be placed on our website afterwards, and the link will be emailed out to you in case you want to listen to it again. I will now introduce our first speaker, Cindy Rampersaud, who is the Senior Vice President at Pearson PLC. Cindy is responsible for the development of all Pearson's UK technical, vocational, and apprenticeship qualifications delivered by colleges, private training providers, and employers. Cindy moved into the education sector in 2011 when she took up the role of Deputy Principal at City and Islington College. In 2016, she was appointed a Deputy FE Commissioner by the Department of Education, working on the government's area-based reviews for the further education sector nationally. Prior to moving into the education sector, Cindy held a number of senior roles in the commercial sector, including at EMI, Warner Brothers, and at Virgin. Okay, over to you, dear Cindy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara, and also thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today, and an invitation to what is a really important and timely discussion on skills, on TVET, and the really important role of education, I think, in really preparing India and other economies for the future. We are really proud of our long and deep relationship with Her Majesty's Government, the Department for International Trade, and also with DFID. We have worked with them over a number of years on many projects to really push the benefits of technical and vocational education globally. And we have worked very closely with the Department for Industry and Jonathan, who's a speaker on this call, to really promote the benefits of BTEC and vocational education in many markets in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, and in China. And it's really been about driving progression, economic growth, social mobility across all levels. We're particularly proud of one project, which is in Africa, a project with CAMFED, which is about enabling and empowering girls to enter the teaching profession. So it's really about driving sustainable change. If I could ask you to just please go to the first slide. So in terms of Pearson, just some background for everybody. We are a global company. We operate in over 70 countries around the world, and we support over 100 million learners a year, working with learners from school age all the way through to lifelong learning. And we've been in India for a number of years, working particularly in the school sector. Can I go to the next slide, please? I was thinking ahead of this call, ahead of this session this morning, about what to open with and what to say. And I think we've all heard the phrase unprecedented used greatly over the last 2 to 3 months. COVID-19 has really put the whole world in a place that is unprecedented, and in some ways has resulted in some changing attitudes, some acceleration of strategies, but actually it's also, I think, is going to have and is having a real profound impact on individuals, on businesses, on communities, and on governments. In India, prior to the pandemic, unemployment was already at an all-time high for 45 years. I read somewhere recently that in April alone, 122 million people in India lost their jobs. COVID-19, we know, is going to drive the world into recession, and actually the impact of that is going to hit the informal economy, which is a massive economy in India, young people in particular, and women. And I think as we think about how we come out of it, there will be a lot of consideration given to where to invest in terms of key industries, but also how to make sure that the workforce is prepared and resilient and able to respond. Stats for India show that your key sectors by GDP, services, agriculture, and the kind of industrial sectors like manufacturing were the key drivers. Post-COVID, there will still be, I think, emphasis on that, but I wonder as well whether there will also be increasingly a shift to other sectors, such as healthcare, such as digital, data security, e-learning, manufacturing, and really the kind of opportunity around exporting. And key to all of that is going to be the emphasis on really preparing the workforce throughout the economy. If we could go to the next slide, we did some research to look at what was happening around talent and skills and industries in the kind of pre-COVID, post-COVID environment. And you can see that actually there are several sectors that we feel have been negatively impacted by COVID in terms of demand. So things like banking, things like real estate, the arts, for example, some manufacturing, some mining. But where we think there'll be real growth will be technology, utilities, healthcare, the ones on the right-hand side. And actually, India, I think, is well placed to respond to many of these, in particular, the ones around technology, some of them manufacturing, some of them pharmaceutical. And with that, I think, is the consideration by government, but also by employers and businesses around how you pivot your resource, how you pivot your investment to really make sure that you can kind of grow in these areas. But then the really important bit is how do you also make sure that the workforce, young people and adults, are prepared to enter these industries, which are going to continually change. Next slide, please. We did a global learning survey back end of last year, actually, or early last year, 2019. And I thought I'd share this because in some ways this conversation in terms of how we move forward is about how does education and learning and skills and lifelong learning, which is embedded in TVET and technical and vocational education, really support the economic recovery as we kind of come out of TVET. But what I wanted to share was some themes from the Global Learning Survey, which I think are probably even more relevant as we kind of come out of TVET. And I won't go through all of these, but effectively this is stuff that I guess we've all been talking about for a while, which is that we know that there is no such thing as a job for life. And actually, if you enter an industry or a job today, the way you're going to be doing that job in 2 or 3 years' time will change, partly because of technology, partly because of the kind of external environment that we're working in. And in order to be relevant and to still be in the world of work, the need to kind of continually learn, to have a DIY mindset and to acquire the right skills will be really, really crucial. And really, the research also showed that markets like China and India are actually leading in upskilling compared to some of the kind of countries like the US and the UK. But the really important bit on this slide that I wanted to talk about was point 5, which is what young people are saying they want from learning. And actually, whilst there's still a really important place for higher education, it's still really valued. Actually, there's a recognition from many young people that what they're also looking for is kind of stackable, bite-size, learn as you go to keep them relevant throughout their careers. So if we could move to the next slide, please. I just want to kind of pull out some of this. So people, and actually we're seeing this as part of COVID. So prior to COVID, there was a real resistance in schools, in colleges, kind of internationally in some markets, to actually using digital and virtual learning as an enabler. And the real tradition has been about face-to-face. What we've seen is with COVID and with lockdown and schools being closed, that around the world there's been more use of online and more use of digital. Now, of course, in order to make this a real enabler, what you need is to have the infrastructure, and you need people to be able to have, young people and adults to be able to have access to technology so that they can benefit from virtual learning. So one of the areas where we think there will be a need to invest is around the infrastructure in order to ensure the accessibility to learning. But we think virtual learning is going to become the new norm, and it's here to stay. And we've seen some shift in attitudes, which I think COVID has accelerated. The next slide, please. The other thing is the power of technology and and preparing young people. So I know Jonathan will talk about the need for curriculum and TVET to be not just about adults and lifelong learning, but actually about embedding it from early years, because in a world where things continually change, we'll need to think about how we prepare children as well. And actually technology as an enabler is proving that it not only increases access, but actually it has the power to break down financial and geographical barriers. And I always love giving the example of, you know, if you're a child in Mumbai and you're trying to study the pyramids in Egypt, you might not physically be able to go there, but actually technology gives you a way to experience it. So the next slide, please. This point about self-learning, I think, is an important one. There are 27 million young professionals in India in their 20s. Most of those young professionals entering the job market now will probably do 3, 4, 5 different roles. They'll need to upskill. And what they're actually saying, 79% of them in India were saying, of the people that we spoke to, were saying that actually they believe that self-learning will become more important and self-service. So being self-empowered to take control of your learning and your development to actually help you progress in your career will be crucial. And that's a similar trend that we're seeing around the world. So if we can move on. And this point, I think, is also really crucial. As we kind of come out of COVID, and we know that we've got the level of unemployment will be high, particularly women will be impacted, as I said, the informal economy and the kind of enterprise economy will be really, really impacted, but also large businesses. The need to continually learn and embrace lifelong learning and technical and vocational education will be absolutely crucial if India is going to come out of COVID, respond and return to growth. I mean, it's the 5th largest economy in the world at the moment, and really reposition itself around those key industries, engendering a culture of lifelong learning at every stage in people's lives will be so crucial. If I can ask you to go to the next slide, please. And also with that, and this is a really important point, is that, and this is an interesting one in terms of when I talked earlier about the shift from face-to-face learning will still be important, but blended and online will become more accepted and more the norm. But with that is also this acceptance that actually, in addition to learning about academic subjects in their own right, and STEM being really key on the agenda, actually what prepares young people, children, adults, to really be successful and actually develops resilience in economies is actually the need to really focus on soft skills. So it's all that stuff around transferability, adaptability. If your industry is going to change, if actually you're going to do multiple jobs, the need to have these soft skills like critical thinking is really crucial. So the next slide, just very quickly, just highlights from our Future of Skills report what some of those skills are: evaluation, teamwork, digital, empathy, the hard and technical skills. So the next slide, please. So in conclusion, I think, COVID is unprecedented. It has made governments, businesses, everywhere think very long and hard about the impact of COVID, but also how we come out of COVID. And what it's done is accelerated some of the thinking around what that means for education, what that means for learning. And I think the kind of key points that I would kind of say are crucial to how India comes out of this, repositions itself, grows, will be that need to amplify and value the importance of technical and vocational education, which is about careers and that changing world of work. But the 4th point on there as well, which is about the culture and love of lifelong learning. I think actually if some of these points, or these 5 points on this slide, are kind of embedded into what does it mean for education and learning, what does it mean for the kind of the skills strategy, I think it will help businesses, individuals, the government really kind of position, I think, India to come out of COVID quickly and return to positive GDP growth. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you very much, Cindy. That was a really interesting point about the shift to DIY lifelong learning at every stage in people's life. and also the importance of soft skills, whose time I think has definitely come. I will now move to our second speaker, Jonathan Ledger, who is the Global Technical and Vocational Education and Training Specialist, TVET in short, for the UK government's Department for International Trade Education team. Jonathan's expertise is used to lead the development of international TVET opportunities for UK providers, developing the UK TVET export capacity, and promoting the UK's capabilities in the sector. He works with embassies and high commissions to understand where opportunities exist and to explain how the UK is well qualified to help stakeholders develop their skills methodology. In terms of India, he's been working with India for over 10 years, so is extremely knowledgeable and passionate about this market. So over to you, dear Jonathan.
Thank you so much for that. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Depends where you are in the world, I guess. It's a real pleasure to be able to join such an esteemed group of colleagues and have so many people logged into this session. Cindy raises some really interesting points about the world in terms of skills pre-COVID and during COVID and actually post-COVID. And I'm going to expand on a little bit more around that and look at it from some slightly different angles as well. But let me just first introduce the Department for International Trade for those of you that don't know the department, because I think that's quite important just to set a context. The UK government wishes to work long-term with governments, and particularly with our friends in India, but to bring about systemic reform of education systems. And in particular, of course, our focus today is on technical and vocational education and training. And, you know, sadly, TVET, as it's known for short, is always seen as a second choice, bad choice. And I have to say, I beg to differ. For me, TVET is a first choice, every time choice, and we need to move more people into the world of skills and TVET and away from higher education. You know, getting a lovely certificate with a degree is great, it's admirable, but most jobs do not require that. And I think that the current situation will force that issue as well a bit more, just like it has done with online learning. And the reason for that is that we'll need quick turnaround on updating skills and building skills to be able to do new jobs in an evolving economic environment that we're all going to be in. So I think you know, you really have to look at TVET as a, you know, a real first choice, and we have to work really hard. And it's a societal change as much as it is you know, a system change and a system thinking change. And I wouldn't expect that change to happen either in you know, the next couple of months. You're not going to change the whole of India's attitudes towards technical and vocational education and training. You know, this will be a generational change, and if we can make the experience of today's workforce a really good one by using technical and vocational education to develop their skills, then their children will have a much more positive outlook on it, because the parents will say, well, look, I did it, so you can do it. And you know, we can demonstrate many cases where actually having a degree and, you know, higher education in that way doesn't get you the jobs that you need or sustain employment. So the UK government actually is looking to kind of look at systemic reform. We are looking at it from the perspective of economic growth and development and that sustainability of that process. We want to share with you global best practice, and I would never, you know, come onto a webinar and say, you know, you must always use the UK because the UK system is the best. Actually, I'm going to be really controversial and say the UK system is not always the best, and sometimes it doesn't work in the UK, and that's because we have a living organic system that continually changes to fit our economy and our society at the time. And so as soon as we explain it to somebody, and my colleagues on the phone are new, for example, she'll tell you, as soon as I explain something about the UK system, next month, you know, there's been a change in the UK system, and it means that that news is almost out of date. So part of what we have to do is to kind of keep the system flexible enough and moldable enough to be able to cope with economic changes, and particularly, of course, with a circumstance like COVID, you know, we need to make sure that we're equipped with the right kind of tools and the system. But the one thing I would say to you all is that the UK expertise in terms of methodology, assessment practices, certification, curriculum, all of these kind of areas are actually applicable around the world, and we have many examples of where countries are picking these up and using them. And this is it's a collective global experience. So we've collected it, over the years. The UK has the oldest vocational system in the world, the oldest documented system in the world, dates back to the 12th century. In the 15th century, the first laws for apprentices were passed, and then in the 16th century, the first guilds were effectively developed, and in the City of London, and the first apprenticeships received their certificates back in those days. And in fact, my 13th grandfather was a carpenter who had apprenticeship in the City of London. So it's really interesting for me that history link remains there. But enough about the broader picture. DIT's role is actually to help UK organisations and international organisations access each other. So what we want to be able to do is to provide a networking link across the globe to be able to identify mutually beneficial partnership opportunities and commercial opportunities that all of us can work with. So we do that through a number of ways which are listed on screen. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but for UK suppliers there is an armful of support that is available, and for Indian partners, if you want to know how to access anybody in the UK TVET network, at the end of this presentation there is an email address, and all you need to do is drop me an email and I'll try and connect you to somebody that can. And if I can't connect you, I'll find somebody that can connect you through a second phase or third phase. So Cindy, you really highlighted the need for sustainable long life skills for jobs, and I think that we don't spend enough time really thinking about all of the promotion, the vocational routes that exist. We have to start earlier. So in the UK, there are lots of examples of schools programs where they talk about industry from as young as 8 years old. So whether this is the print industry, the engineering industry, or whether it's Formula One sectors, there are programs that are curriculum mapped, that are delivered by teachers in schools. They're not career programs as such, but what they do is a project, and in that project it demonstrates the variety of jobs that exist within each industry sector. And that's really important, because when you look at the type of jobs that exist in any economy, and if we take the print industry as one example, there are actually about 300 different jobs just in the print industry. And yet young people will either think, oh my God, print is dirty, I get black hands from the ink, or it's boring because new modern printers do everything and I just click a mouse on a keyboard and something comes out of the printer. And actually that's not true. It still requires accountants, and it still requires logistics teams and all sorts of different jobs. So even though you learn a skill, you might actually have to take that skill and work across a number of industries. An engineer is an engineer, for example. If you look at car manufacturing, all cars actually that burn petrol or diesel work in the same way. They just have different brands on them, and the engineers, the power behind that effectively is all the same. You can apply those skills across many manufacturers. What you can't apply, of course, is the bit that makes them unique, the bit that makes them Tata cars or Rolls-Royce cars or whatever it is that you're dealing with. But that is the bit that is taught by that particular company on the day that you arrive. So this thing about thinking at work has to start much earlier. We have to do much better at informing people about what kind of skills and what kind of tools are required. And it is worth, as I'll mention later, that many jobs are not yet created. So we are effectively, particularly with young people, equipping them for jobs that don't currently exist. And that's kind of a magic trick that the education sector is responsible for. We are their futures, and we are responsible for their futures. Part of this process, of course, then is about developing workplace skills, so helping people get into jobs, then to recognise that where you can with recognised qualifications, apprenticeships, those kind of tools, and then supporting them through career development and professional development activities so that they can sustain their employment throughout their life. And Cindy, you mentioned that some people will do 5 or 6 jobs in the future, and actually that I think we'll see much more of multitask jobs where one individual has 3 or 4 at the same time maybe, but also they might swap those around quite frequently. So over the longevity of their career, they might end up with 20 different jobs. But invariably, when you look at that pathway, most people are a bit like frogs on a pond. They hop from leaf to leaf, and they take skills from one job to the next job, and they take some skills from that job to the next job. And so your path is usually always kind of connected with at least part of your skill pattern as you go across that pond. And then we hope you get to the other side and enjoy the green grass of a long retirement. So that's the ultimate aim for everybody, of course. Implications, though, of current situation and the way that the world is changing. There are a different number of skills, and I'm not going to talk about each of those skills, but they do require a different set of core because so many are becoming self-employed or having to be kind of entrepreneurial within their business outside the digital skills. And I just mean using a little bit of Word and Excel. It's actually about really competently being able to use this for big data, all sorts of different processes that are now involved. And I'm still meeting too many people that have really good digital skills and really believe in where the word are connected, and you've got to better that. So these are the kind of skills that need to be taken along. Foundation skills, of course, these are the core mathematics, English, sciences, all of those kind of things. And then specialist technical skills. And those specialist technical skills are where the BTEC really do come into play, because they are built by employers, made by employers, and effectively reviewed by employers. And this is about making sure that you have the raw skills you need to do that. And you'll notice on the real scheme, but 4 of those you can carry with you wherever you go. It's the 5th one, actually labelled one of the specialised technical skills. That is the one that gets based on each employer as you go to that employer. But the rest of it is about a full bag of skills for life. So I want to talk a bit about industry engagement, because I think that industry engagement is actually the key to a lot of this. And I always congratulate Pearson on their industry engagement and the way that they focus on what industry needs. Where employers are really happy with the results and promote the good work that we do. And that is the only way that the TVET message is going to get stronger, is through high quality delivery. And of course it's important because the employers are the ones providing the jobs. And why do they care? Well, employers are having a hard time, just like we are as individuals. And if shops are closed, or they don't have enough staff to do their job, they can't produce enough widgets to make their business cost efficient. A couple of years back, actually it's more than a couple of years back, I did a piece of work for a multinational mining company. And when we looked at the return on investment of training, we invested something like £300,000 in 1 year for training. And that actually delivered back to the employer £4 million worth of cost savings. And where did those cost savings come from? Well, we taught people how to drive vehicles properly, which reduced the wear and tear. It meant they could produce more goods and get them out the gate quicker, so they could actually produce more orders. More orders means more cash. So, it's quite easy actually to start measuring the return on investment. And the problem is with the skills market and the skills suppliers, nobody ever thinks to draw the line in the sand before you start working with a particular employer or particular student. And so that when you get to the end, actually, you don't know what that journey was. You just have somebody that is achieving a qualification, but you don't actually know the impact of that. And I think, again, the sector needs to do more around actually understanding its impact and its return on investment. And then when, of course, you're promoting BTEC and technical qualifications to an employer, it becomes much easier because it's always a business case. The accountants will say, how much does it cost me and how much will I get back? And it becomes a really easy argument when you can demonstrate that skills have a financial value. So industry own and use everything that is about BTECs and technical and vocational education. It's about competency standards. It is about optimizing the supply around the recruitment of apprentices and graduates. And in the UK now, for example, you can do a degree apprenticeship. And effectively, that means you get a degree from a university without ever having to go to a university. All done at work, while you work, and you get paid. And that's really important because a lot of graduates still leave university with no job prospects. So 60% of graduates leave with a job in the UK. That means that's 40% unemployment. In TVET in the UK, 95% of people in TVET already have a job or get a job during the TVET process. Just conscious of time, so I'll just quickly whiz through. The impact on skills. So this is really important for the young part of our process. 75% of young people in primary education will do jobs that are not yet created. And I'm going to show you something on screen, which is called a mobile phone. And many of you, if you're not watching on one and you're not watching on a tablet, will have one of these very slender devices. And I'm sorry, my picture on the right-hand side shows actually even an out-of-date phone already. But I remember in 1985, somebody coming into a bank where I worked and putting a phone on the counter, and I thought they were really super rich because it was the size of a car battery, but it could only make phone calls. Now you can lay in bed all day and you can run your life from a mobile telephone, and you can have cleaners come in and food delivered and all of that kind of stuff, all from a phone. And who would have dreamt that in 1985? So it just shows how quickly the world evolves and how skills need to evolve with it. When change comes along, what is really important is it takes a long time for that change to actually have an impact. So the rate of change in technology is really swift, and it's an uphill struggle for all of us to kind of keep up with it. Individuals are always behind the curve on that, so that's where the skills gap is. Businesses are usually even further behind on that, and of course COVID has demonstrated the need to employers that they must actually take on new ways of working remotely and all of these kind of good things that enable their businesses to run where they can. And then of course there is always a policy deficit, a policy lag, because the policy usually follows after all of that. And that skills gap is the bit that we're always chasing, and we will always be chasing. And that's why you have to be the best deliverer, the best educationalist with the best pedagogy, and you have to make sure that your curriculum is bang up to date and it's relevant to everybody. And that's where BTECs and the like come into play, because they're built by employers. Employers can see their future, and employers will know what they want when they want it. And we have to be training for that. And if we're not, then you have to stop what you're doing and go find another job. Cindy, you talked about some skills, and I've just slipped past the slide on that just because of time, but I'm not going to go over that. But I think, what was before COVID will not be the same. You've mentioned, shifting economies and things like that already, and I think there will be a different requirement, and we will need to help people transition from one career to another or one job to another, as well as obviously enter those jobs for the first time. In terms of Industry 4, which everyone is excited about, and the application of Industry 4 technologies, virtual reality, all of these kind of good things, the problem is not enough people have those skills still. That's a big issue. Not enough people have those skills in a way that can be applied to work. And even more worrying, and I think we always forget this, not enough businesses have those skills, so they don't understand how to employ those skills to be able to make their business effectively use those tools and techniques. So there is part of our job is about educating employers to technical and vocational education and the skills that are required. Just because a business is good doesn't mean to say that the managers know what they're doing. They might need marketing and finance and all of that kind of training as well. So that's where the UK provision and the Indian provision needs to work together to look at seriously what is the right model. And in India, of course, as there are in the UK, there are challenges to the mode of delivery and the model of delivery. And you really got to take a look at the activities and the resources that are required, and what's around you. In some parts of India, for example, really remote, how do you reach those people and make it very inclusive so that they stand a chance of getting on in their lives? And you've got to think about value. What is the value proposition of skills? Don't just keep talking about skills. That's a dead argument. What's the value of skills on the economy, on the individual, on society, on government? Each one of these will look at the same thing in a slightly different way. So I just want to really end my blast here with a quick summary of the uniqueness of the UK's skills system. So it's all built around industry engagement. It is one of the highest quality systems in the world. And in fact, if we take a look at Ofsted, which is the body that regulates and looks after the quality of teaching and learning in the UK, you know, it's a bit like a shark. It has teeth. The system works. If training providers do not deliver the quality of the learner journey that's required, then, you know, Ofsted has regulatory powers to be able to do something about it. You know, we're very sector orientated in the UK, and obviously as new sectors and subsectors emerge, we focus on them because that's what we want to deliver. We have a wide variety of training providers, 305 public colleges in the UK, over 6,500 independent private training providers. The network is massive. We have 162 awarding organisations, and those awarding organisations, you know, all kind of do the same thing, but they are issuing regulated certificates on behalf of the UK government because the UK government doesn't actually issue certificates itself. So lots of reasons why our system is unique in that way. But what that does do is that gives us a lot of areas where we can help our Indian partners to be able to build those things into the way that you want to work, and not in a UK way. This is about Indians creating a system for India, for Indian people. Bit more about the UK expertise there. There we are, ladies and gentlemen. I've rattled through that, but our expertise is there to help you win. And please do get in touch if there's anything we can help with. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. You're absolutely right that now is the right time to give relevant vocational and training education the importance it deserves and start teaching these skills for life at a much younger age. And of course, that industry engagement with education right from the start is absolutely crucial. Just to say that that's precisely an area that the UKIBC is always working to bring about. Great to know that, you know, your expertise is there to help anyone. So thank you very much for that. And our final speaker is Anu Gupta, Head of Skills at DFID India. Anu has over 20 years experience of working in DFID, where she has done a wide range of roles, such as leading the private sector team, as well as a diverse range of state, national, and civil society programs in the development sector. Anu holds a postgraduate in child development and education and is a member of the UK's Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. Please go ahead, Anu.
A very good morning, good afternoon, everyone. From a cloudy Delhi, I welcome you all. Thank you very much to the UKIBC team for inviting me to this webinar, which has a great participation from diverse backgrounds, both in the UK and India, and perhaps elsewhere. I see this as an opportunity not only to share some thoughts, and I'm lucky because I've got two people who've spoken ahead of me, so I can be quicker. But most importantly, I'm looking forward to getting some views and suggestions from partners on where exactly do they see players like us adding the most value in the Indian UK system. I'll begin by just saying a few bits about our work and DFID in India. So we are an independent UK government ministry. In India, we work out of the British High Commission, and our focus is around joint prosperity. We are looking at certain specific sectors, skills in entrepreneurship being one of them. We work with the Government of India and several state governments as well, looking at both technical assistance as well as investments. Way back in 2018, the two prime ministers signed an India-UK government-to-government memorandum of understanding, which forms the basis of our work. And as you can see, DFID is one part of it, but we have several others, such as the research work that is happening, scholarship, the British Council language work that you are familiar with, and a lot of work being done by the UK industry in India, which is also forming part of it. Moving on to our program, which is called Skills for Job. This is a joint program where we are looking at developing the skills market in India, getting the best practice between the two countries. We have focused attention on certain sectors, the ones that you see in the middle circle, precisely because of the fact that we think UK has slightly more ahead on these sectors, both in terms of technical as well as skilling is concerned. What we do essentially is to work with the government and a host of other partners to look at systems, capacity building issues, looking at language and employability skills, bringing in best practice on assessment and certification, the endeavor being that the Indian ecosystem on skills is at par with the international one. In whatever we do, women and girls and people with disabilities and other marginalized populations remain at the heart. So moving on to the topic that is there, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but just to set the context, a quarter of the global surge in extreme poverty as a result of COVID will come from India. I understand that 1 in every 5 salaried individual in India has lost their job in the last few months. Millions of migrants, and you've heard all their stories, are on the roads, and over 150 million students whose educations have been disrupted, whether it's in the school or the TVET system. These are delays in completion, assessments, or the start of new cycle. I often worry, will people come back? Will students come back to where we have left? Nevertheless, some early trends are really about digital, self-paced, customized learning that is happening. There's a lot of discussion, and Jonathan and Cindy both paid on future skills, where data will be at the heart of it, and also responding to the change in the way jobs will come and what industry requires. Tara very helpfully laid the background on emerging sectors. Some sectors will drop out in this journey of change, while others will emerge. However, we're not sure how permanent or temporary these changes will be about. There's also issues around adaptive learning, using digital means, and from the supply side, there are lots of new innovations that are happening in terms of blended learning, using e-modules, e-value chains, etc. Having said that, it's not that all of these are new, most were happening, but the scale and complexity of what has happened in the last 2 months is something that is really keeping us on our toes, particularly for India, just because of our sheer volumes and diversity, both geographic as well as population wise, is something that we need to keep an eye on. In India, in our program, we have done some immediate changes, which are mostly short-term responses to help the Indian ecosystem. Primarily, we're working with the government because that's being a bilateral cooperation partner. Now we are really focusing only on the youth and the students. But we are now looking at a range of students, if I were to say so, to look at lifelong learning. We have introduced several online learning sessions, and our partnerships between the institutions have really moved on from being only focused to government to now including a range of private sector players as well as civil society. We are and have already started using UK expertise to look at e-modules and e-assessments in India. Specific focus have been on people with disabilities. That's a demand that has come to look at how to engage with them in this challenging time. A few things that we have done immediately: shifted our priority sectors. Health, like everything else is happening around in the country, health has been brought in, and we've come into support through Ministry of Health and WHO to look at training and capacity building on COVID surveillance as well. In all of these, we see a big partnership with the UK. And I won't say, because Jonathan has laid a very good foundation for me on that, but really there is a huge demand in looking at whether it is ranging on apprenticeships, looking at training of trainers, joint research, strengthening the capacity of the Indian ecosystem, not to blueprint what UK is doing, but really to adapt and mold what good practices the UK is bringing about. I would just want to, sort of pause and say, while we have done all this, but there's lots more to be done. I think the world is changed and is changing. Sustainable growth will really need to look at learning plus models. So I think, and Cindy and Jonathan both laid a bit of emphasis on that we will need to, like it or not, within our education TVET systems, look at a holistic approach, which involves learning, issues around health, social security, ethics, justice, really to see students and youth as full human beings and not just what happens in the classroom. Then there's all thing about green recovery. There's about things about green skills, green jobs, economy. I'm sure you must have all read, heard, and seen many articles and publications coming on it. This is a real opportunity to mainstream the greening agenda in the new world. And last but not the least, it's really, really important to look at those which will be left behind. We have been talking about tech-based stuff, but in India, does everybody really have access to technology? I'm not just talking about equipments or connectivity, and Cindy talked about investment in infrastructure, but the time to learn. I'm very sure a big, huge population which was earlier involved in skilling is now going to be in this dilemma of, do I earn, do I learn, or can I do both? Similarly, I would like to specifically talk about women and girls and people with disabilities. For a variety of different reasons, there will be those who will be having difficulties in accessing the skilling ecosystem, and not to say about the millions of informal, unorganized sectors. Now, even as DFID, we have taken baby steps to respond to COVID, but we need to do a lot more to really look at this population who is in the real need to do work. And last, I'd like to just conclude with some thoughts on roles. Roles, as I said, I think we are the development agency. We work in partnerships, mostly coming in as knowledge partners, but there's a role for everyone to play, and there's even greater role for coordination and coherence amongst us. So to work together with training fraternity, the government, the industry, and within the development community to come together. I would just want to highlight some new skills. A lot has been said about it, but I would like to add that it's not just about personal resilience. I think the skills will move beyond the physical and the cognitive skills, and maybe even cover some parts of spirituality, able to manage your stress, be able to respond, able to weed out information, good or bad information, all in the remit of resilience. And communications is not just digital and tech, as some of my speakers said, but it's also about verbal, non-verbal, because a lot of it will not be face-to-face like the way we are doing today. Language skills, presentation skills, all of this will come into handy. And lastly, I see apprenticeships in India. It's a very popular practice in the UK and a very integral part of the TVET system. But in India, it has not really taken off. I wonder whether this is the time where we could redefine, look at the role of apprenticeship and give it a big push. It's a big win-win. Think of it from the point of students. They have the ability to learn and earn, and very good way to bridge between education and TVET also. From the employer's perspective, who's still looking at financial liabilities, this is a limited liability obligation. We are likely to get more enthused people, and there's also options for flexible mobility along this. So I'd just like to leave some thoughts around this. And as I just sort of say, change is the only constant, something that all of us will resonate with at this point of time. But we really need to work together, and we are very open for any suggestions that we as DFID operating in India in partnership with DIT colleagues like Jonathan and UK fraternity represented by Cindy today will be very happy to look at suggestions on how we can make this future successful for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anu. That was, hold on, sorry. Yeah, so I thought I was on mute. That was most interesting. Really great to hear about different skills for jobs programs, which seems to be doing excellent work in all the right areas. Good to hear about all the numerous areas of collaboration between the UK and India. And I think, yes, especially important to focus on apprenticeships and obviously not to leave anyone behind, especially the most vulnerable. That brings us to the close of our speaker session, and now we will open up the discussion to our audience for any questions, comments, suggestions, or solutions. If you'd like, please could you share your name and company when you post the questions. I'm just going to have a look to see for the first question. Okay, here we go. Our first question is, how has the COVID-19 situation affected the Indian consumer and Indian retail market? Have the restrictions been as firm, and how long is the recovery expected to take? It's from Malcolm Cole. Would anybody like to take that?
Could you please just repeat the question for me? Sorry, I missed part of it.
Yes, sure. The question is, how has the COVID-19 situation affected the Indian consumer and Indian retail market? Have the restrictions been as firm, and how long is the recovery expected to take?
Okay, so from a Department for International Trade perspective, I can tell you that there is quite extensive lockdowns that have happened, and my colleagues in India will explain more about that. And the impact has been quite severe on the sector. So there will be a long tail to this, and a long way out, just like there is, I guess, in most countries where it's had a huge impact on retail hospitality generally.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Can I come in?
Yes, go for it,
Madam,
Anu.
thank you very much for asking this question. I'm not an economist, so please bear with me on this. But like all countries, the economy and the markets have been hugely impacted, and India even more so because of the fact that our retail market is also fragmented across both informal and formal sector. We were one of the first ones to impose strict lockdown and are now only gradually unlocking, if I were to say. So it's a huge loss. I don't have numbers, but I can share it afterwards around side. And it's only just the start of this week that we have seen the markets really opening up, that too in phases. I can see us going at least a good 18 to 24 months before we come down to normal business, if we ever do. Of course, all of this will also mean that there's going to be a shift in the way these markets operate. Already you are seeing a surge of e-commerce and fintech solutions, etc. Alongside that, my hunch is that the retail market that you and I were used to a couple of months back will not be the same. And therefore, related to that will be the skilling and workforce requirement.
Thank you, Anu. That's helpful. Thanks both. The next question, whoever wants to pick up, let me know. What about brick and mortar campuses in the post-COVID world? Will they become redundant? It's by Sanjoy Mukherjee.
So I'm happy to come in on this one. I think it's Cindy. Our general view is that they won't become redundant, but they will be different. And certainly in terms of what we're seeing around return to higher education, in the near future, we're seeing many universities saying that the lectures will be online. But I think that kind of culturally, there's a big shift to moving to purely online. So I think actually there will be an element of sort of blended increasingly, where I think students on kind of full programs will be partly in the universities, but partly doing learning virtually. I also think, the point that Anu made about the role of apprenticeships, and actually apprenticeships being a way into the workplace, and again combining work and study. And I think young people taking ownership and accountability and empowering themselves more around what they want. And our global learning survey talked a lot about increased demand for bite-sized, for modular, for stackable, for really relevant, timely learning. So I think it will evolve. I don't think it will disappear completely, but I think blended, online, stackable, all of that learning will become more the norm. If we look forward 5 years out, it will be the norm, I think.
Jonathan here. Just to add to that, Cindy, if I can, actually I think the purchaser, and the purchaser being the student in many cases, will look at this much more about the value of the learning that they get and the use that that learning has in terms of what it returns to them for jobs and their futures. I think that will come under much more scrutiny going forward. They will look at the value versus the quality in a way that has never been done before. Particularly, of course, if education is being switched to online, people will be asking, what's that experience look like compared to actually going to a classroom and getting that bigger, broader experience that you would get in a class type situation. So I think bigger emphasis on making sure that the programs are higher quality and actually deliver bang for their buck, I think is going to be one of the key things that youngsters and students generally will look for.
Thank you both. And I think on a related note, the question is also about the need for upskilling the teaching staff in this new era of e-learning. You know, is that important? And I would say that it feels like a rhetorical question that, yes, you definitely have to upskill the teaching staff, but would you all like to add anything to that?
Yeah, if you think about the way that teachers have had to try and cope with this situation, you know, suddenly, you know, they've moved or been thrown from a classroom into a world that they might not be familiar with, and you know, many you know, professors at university or TVET teachers and assessors, you know, are just like, you know, they're ordinary people, you know, with ordinary skills, and some are better than others with tech, and suddenly, you know, they've got to do all of this online and, you know, make their work a bit more exciting online and interactive and all of that, instead of just, you know, having people sitting there watching a screen all day long, you know, doing learning in a boring manner. And I think that's a huge leap, and I think there needs to be a lot more capacity building and capability building of teachers generally. That was there before COVID. Now, actually, I think it's a whole new bag of skills as well that comes with it in the digital space, that needs to be added onto that in a much bigger way. So it'll be interesting to see how that is. But of course, your capability and capacity of teaching staff actually is at the top of the centre. But I'd also add that to a list of leadership and government of TVET centres. So many leaders and governors of TVET centres actually do not manage that centre in a way that is really getting the best out of TVET. It's just, you know, it's just not impactful enough. And I think they have to be the first that have their capacity and capability built, and then the teachers and trainers at the same time.
Yeah, I agree, Jonathan. And one of the things that I would add is that during the COVID period, we have been doing a lot of work with the teaching community in schools, in colleges, and in higher ed, and really supporting them around teaching in this new way. So teaching in a digital world, and kind of helping them upskill and provide CPD around online teaching and learning. I think the other thing I would say around the conversation around TVET and careers is the skills. There's a kind of point that you made, Jonathan, about demand and need for more teachers and the skills around online, but actually there's also the bit around dual professionals. And as TVET becomes more relevant, actually how do we make sure that the teaching profession is up to date with the skills of particular industries? And actually that's about employers and educators working really closely together, and really thinking about that dual professional skills in order to kind of keep supporting the requirements of learners.
Tara, I'd just like to say that this is one area where we are talking to the government of India, both at the centre and the state, and there's a huge opportunity for collaboration with the UK on both looking at upskilling teacher ability, but also looking at e-content and e-assessments. So each of these three are something that we, I think the world itself is going through, but something that we feel that in India, there's a huge opportunity to collaborate with UK players.
Yeah, we would agree.
Absolutely agree, especially because, you know, we have to raise the quality of teaching significantly. So yeah, another question, sort of related. How can we encourage employers to participate in and contribute to the skills programs? That's a tricky one. How do we get them to get involved?
It is a tricky one, but actually it's kind of an easy one too. And I hate to say that, but you know, as somebody that spent 12 years in a sector skills council and whose main job was to engage with employers, we went through a lot of pain. All sector skills councils go through a lot of pain because it takes a lot of effort to go around knocking on doors and engaging with employers. And actually, after all of that, I would say to you, don't do that. Don't do that at all. Don't try to engage with 100% of industry. You'll never do it. each industry will always have a number of employers that are advocates of skills. So you don't need to do anything to them. They are naturally ambassadors for skills. They love skills. They grew up, you know, in the gutter of the street, and they made their own life, and they will tell you that they got all the skills they needed as they went on their journey in life. And they are the employers that you need to seek out first to join you on your journey, because they are your best advertisement, and they will help and support you in any way that they can, including lending industry expertise, because they see the benefit of it. You don't need to explain it to them. They already understand it. And then group two are those that kind of sit on the fence. So with a little gentle persuasion, you could knock them off the fence. So maybe by talking to those ambassadors in industry, they will have friends that, you know, they can encourage to come to the party and join in with skills and skills related activities, and whether that's, you know, developing apprenticeship standards or curriculum standards or providing expertise to build curriculum, it doesn't matter. But you've got to find what I would call the friendlies that exist in every industry, and they are there. Normally it's about 5% of every sector will kind of automatically be in the skills mode, and another 15% will be sitting on the fence. So, you know, potentially it's up to 20% of a sector that you could quite easily, without very much effort at all, engage with and get them to come along on your journey. Don't waste your time chasing the other 80%, because you will spend 80% of your energies after those 80%, and you will not get very far. You might get one or two to come and join the party, but it's not enough to tip the balance. So concentrate on ambassadors and those that are kind of almost there, sitting on the fence, just needing a little nudge.
Can I come in? Oh, sorry. Go on, Anu.
Okay, thank you. While Jonathan is an expert in terms of employer engagement, you know, these times are slightly unique, and particularly in India, where a majority of our workforce has shifted, either geographically or you know, otherwise. So I see that in the next few months, or perhaps even longer, the industry itself will need to feel the need to engage. So it will be a bit like a chicken and egg situation, where if you have to continue with your businesses, and you know your models are changing, you will need not the same type of workforce, and therefore need to engage. And the same goes with the, you know, sort of the training fraternity, if I were to say that what they churn out is not what they used to churn out earlier. So it will be a bit of collaboration on both sides. Often I have seen a very polarized view. Industry says training people don't engage us, training says industry don't engage us. So I think it's the time where both need to come together, facilitated by knowledge partners or technical agencies, or incentivized by government to do it. So it won't be an either or situation. If we really get to the magic of revival and recovery, then both will have to step a foot forward.
Yeah, I mean, Anu, I was going to come in and say something similar, which is actually, I think for employers, the need to engage is even greater now, because they have to think about their pipeline of talent, and they have to think about their workforce strategy and how that's going to change in a changing world. I think the other thing is that we have quite good experience. I mean, BTEC, every single sector is developed in partnership with employers. And it's about it being relevant. I think Jonathan's point around, you know, picking the employers that can drive that, or the sectors that can drive that, is really crucial. But if I give you one really small example, we signed an agreement with Esports UK about a month ago. And esports, as you know, is one of the fastest growing industries in the world. But in order for that industry to keep growing and to have talent, actually what we need to do is develop the skills and training for that industry, and it's by working with them in partnership that we've been able to do that. That's one example, but we do that across other sectors. We do it across healthcare, we do it across engineering. It's about working closely with employers and making sure that what's being taught and how learners are being prepared in the vocational world and with skills is linked to what their needs are, so that actually their businesses can flourish.
Anu and Cindy, you raised some really good points. I mean, for me, it's about, you know, once we demonstrate the value to employers, you'll always get more employers that want to be interested because they see the benefit for their business, because that's always what's on their mind, is the benefit to their industry and their own business. And I guess from a government perspective, whether that's national, regional or local, you know, you can put in place regulatory requirements. So the mining industry, for example, in the UK has a whole host of regulation, and actually it talks about, you know, demonstrating competence, and employers can only do that in certain ways through certain qualifications. And so the industry sits around the table and talks about that, because obviously it, you know, it has to do it. So regulatory powers are really useful, and if you can find legislation that links to a particular qualification or whatever that you're supplying, then actually that just helps to reinforce the need for employers to be part of that conversation. There are sector things that can be done as well in terms of levers. So the sector can decide to do something voluntarily, and there are many UK sectors that have a voluntary scheme that people sign up to. So, you know, precast concrete, whilst there's health and safety regulation, there is actually a voluntary scheme where everyone has to do a particular series of programs to get a particular certificate and an operating card or license to operate effectively. And then there are financial levers. So in the UK, we've set up, as part of the apprenticeship program, an apprenticeship levy that raises funds particularly for the apprenticeships and only for the apprenticeships. And the great thing about a levy, and I say this cautiously, of course, because no one wants to take money off employers when they don't need it, but the thing is, once you start taking money off employers, they want to understand the value of it, and they want to understand how that money is being spent, and so they take much more interest. And you'll be surprised how much financial levers like that are actually a big influence in driving how many employers come to play with you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we pretty much have time for just one more question, or I'll try for two. There are quite a few questions on the impact on the higher education sector. You know, how can students continue to study in the UK? What about classroom training? So I'm kind of putting it together. And another question around those lines is about scholarships and education loans. So I was just wondering if you want to somebody wants to briefly touch on the impact on the higher education sector and availability of loans. That would be great. I've kind of clubbed 4 questions together.
So the higher education stuff, I think the best thing to do with that, we actually have some government lines that will feed in. I'm happy to take those questions afterwards and supply you with the answer. We can include them in the pack that will go out to all the participants that are on the call, if that's okay, rather than confuse this call and mix it up with TVET and HE in that way.
Yes, fine, thank you. And I would ask the last one, which I think is quite important, and that's around, you know, positive perceptions of vocational skills. So maybe, you know, whoever wants to take it, and what best practices are there to support parity of esteem when it comes to the recognition of TVET versus higher education?
I am going to dive in first here, because I think Cindy knows this is my passion.
Yes.
For me, so I already said to you that, you know, TVET is a first choice, every time choice, and I think everyone on the phone is an ambassador for that. You know, you all got to where you're doing, you know, either through a career or suddenly, like me, you know, you're the age of 21 and you realise that you've suddenly achieved, you know, a pathway in your life, and you don't really know how you got there. But, you know, TVET was actually your comfort blanket on the way through your journey, because, you know, we all learn things at work every single day. And so TVET is there for everybody, and anyone that says otherwise is mistaken. And I once, last September, actually delivered a presentation for ASEAN, so this is, you know, Southeast Asia. And interestingly, there was an Indian company that was on the stage, and they were doing a presentation to open one of the sessions, and they were talking really derogatory about TVET students being stupid, white collar, you know, all sorts of phraseology. And I'm afraid it all starts with that. And if it starts with that, that means it starts with every single one of you that is on the phone. And you have to really believe that TVET makes a difference for everybody, not just students, for employers, society, governments, and the way that we actually live our lives as human beings. And if you get that message out there, that is infectious, and people will come on that journey with you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That brings us to the end of our Q&A round. Don't worry, all the other questions which we haven't answered, we will take up later. I hope you will agree with me that this was an absolutely fascinating discussion, and one that requires many more such sessions to allow us to really understand the issues in more detail. This, one time is not enough. So I would like to conclude by saying a huge and heartfelt thank you to our excellent speakers and to you all for participating in the first of our series of the Future of Work webinars. There will definitely be more such sessions in the months to come, so do watch this space. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it useful and interesting, and I look forward to your inputs at future webinars. Many thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and all the panelists, and most importantly, our audience.
Thank you.